Okay, we are live.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hi, everyone on Zoom that I can see. And it's not Zoom, sorry, it's StreamYard. Sorry, StreamYard. We're on StreamYard. Hello to everyone signing up on Facebook. We're going to wait a few minutes before we really get into things so that you can all be here and join us. Please say hello in the comments so that we can greet you. We have several little announcements that we'll share while we are waiting. But let me look and see if I can find this. Okay, there we are. Yes, please say hello. Good morning, Tiffany. Let me pull up my announcements. Hi, Forrest. Okay, well, first I just want to say hi and welcome to the people who are helping lead the gathering this morning. Hello to Matthew and Fran and David and Kristen and Eleanor and Riker. You want to give a wave? We are so excited to have our very own Dr. David Holley here this morning to preach for our last week of the series, A Collection of Epiphanies. Thank you so much for being here, David. Yay! We are going to have a deeper look with him in a little bit, so you'll get to learn more. But we're so excited for him to be here and close out this series, this particularly personal, reflective series with us this morning. Hi, Joyce. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Paul, Anna. Hello to everybody signing on. I'm going to share announcements now. Our first announcement is that we have a baptism cohort that we're gathering up those who might be interested. This is for children who are ages 7 and up, children or youth who are ages 7 and up. This is a very intentionally designed journey and formation period leading up to a baptism this summer. If you would like to read more, we wrote and particularly Matthew, a catechism, and you can read about it. We've just dropped the link. So if you're a parent of a kid who you think might truly be interested in this kind of an experience, please feel free to go and read through that document. We need to know by February 7th if you're going to participate, because there are several meetings of the cohort between then and the summer when the baptism happens. So I think those dates are also in that document. The dates are non-negotiable. You have to be available for them. So, but don't worry, we will have other cohorts.
It's a really beautiful process. We handcrafted it, and there is no other community I've seen that does this. Hopefully more will as time goes on, but yeah.
Yeah, it's really special.
Yeah, it's something we're proud of.
Yes, definitely. Looking in the Paul, some interesting comments here. I was actually, okay, Paul made a comment. Maybe I'll flash it up on the screen for people. I just want to say, I know that meeting virtually is not ideal, and we really need our in-person moments and pockets of community, but I am so grateful for the way this community shows up on our virtual gatherings. And we love when you comment. We love when you share. I know so many of my colleagues who are just so tired, and it's so hard for them to show up week after week and not receive any engagement. So thank you so much for just really participating in these gatherings. You all give so much energy to this space, and we're grateful for you. Okay, so another announcement, Braiding Sweetgrass meeting 2 is coming up on February 7th, and we really want you to sign up for meeting for that. That's an in-person meeting with all the proper precautions taken depending on what is happening in any given month, because we know things are constantly changing. We want to invite you to join that. You don't have to have been to another one. All you have to do is just read some of that book, because it really is so beautiful. We want you to receive the gift that that book is to your soul, to your consciousness, and to the way that you move in the world after you've read something like it. It's so beautiful. Fran, do you have any comments?
Only that the location for the meeting on February 7th is still to be determined, and I'm basing that on the weather. And like, if we can meet outside, we will. So stay tuned for that, and send me a direct message if you want to join.
Yes. Thanks, Fran. We did put a link in the comments where you can sign up, but we do highly recommend just going ahead and messaging Fran so that she can get that information immediately from you. Okay, we have another sign up. It's for Metamorphosis. Metamorphosis is a cohort of people joining together to share companionship, inspiration, and soul nourishment on the ever-evolving journey of faith and spirituality. This is geared toward anybody. Doesn't matter if you've been in our church forever, if you're brand new, if you're lurking online. This is geared toward people who are in the midst of faith deconstruction, renovation, and looking for deeper community support. That said, this is geared toward our local community because we do meet in person for half of those meetings. And it's geared toward people who are very intentionally interested and invested in Peace of Christ community, even if it's a newer investment. So feel free to apply for that. It's such a meaningful cohort, and the deadline for applying is like the weekend of February 18th, 19th, around there. So make sure to apply. It's a thoughtful application, so give yourself some time. I also wanted to just celebrate for a moment Dr. David Holley's book that just recently released. This is his third book. We've got a philosopher on our hands, y'all. Like, this person is writing books, okay? But this book is a personal book. This book is really an accessible book for anybody. It's called Changing Your Mind Without Losing Your Faith. So go check it out. We put a link up. We'll learn more about that in just a little bit. But congratulations. We're really excited. And thanks for putting an offering into the world that anyone in our community can really access. We're grateful for that. Okay, finally, this coming Sunday, a week from today, no church. We'll have our Feed Your Soul Sunday for the month of February. So plan to do something absolutely glorious or totally mundane, whatever gives you joy and rest. I think that's all that I have. Anything else, y'all? Oh, go get your communion elements. I forgot to share. Go get your communion elements. If you haven't, hold yours up in the picture there. If you're online, you can hold them up and show everyone. We all do our own thing, and it's all meaningful, all matters. And then, of course, please feel free to donate to our work as a community. Every single donation makes a difference in the life of our community, and we're always transparent as well. So if you ever want to see what's happening with money at any given point, we can send that out to you, and we do often update. So you need to sign up for our weekly emails if you want to be more in touch with the life of our community. Donate, sign up for emails, message me or Fran or Matt with any questions. Okay, sorry so long. Now we get to have this wonderful moment where Fran helps us center ourselves for this time of community together.
Yeah, so we chime the hour every week as a signal to ourselves and each other that this is sacred ground, sacred time.
Hey, we were muted. Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm David. This is Riker. We're so excited to be here this morning for the Peace Kids message. So
we're going to read Change Sings.
We're going to read this book called Change Sings by Amanda Gorman.
And Lamong.
And
And so if you are one of our Peace kids, gather around, and we are going to check this out together.
Oh, and one more thing. While we read through the book, we're going to ask you to write about how you can change the world.
So after we read, one of the things you can do today is to write about how you can change the world. One of the things that we know about Jesus is that he changed the world. And Jesus has inspired a lot of other people to change the world. People like
me.
And who are some of the people we were talking about before? Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.
And I forgot her name. Rosa Parks.
Yeah, and Mother Teresa, all kinds of people. So here we go.
I can hear change coming in its loudest, proudest song. I don't fear change coming, so I sing along. I scream with the skies of red and blue streamers. I dream with the cries of tried and true dreamers.
I'm really doing my best here. I'm so sorry. We should have practiced this part. We practiced reading it, but not this part.
I chant. I'm a chant that rises and rings. There's hope for my change sings. Though some don't understand it, those windmills of mysteries, I sing with the planet of all its hills of histories. I hum with 100 hearts, each one of us lifting a hand. I use my strengths and my smarts to take a knee to make a stand. I'm bright as the light each day brings. There's love where my change sings. I show tolerance is. Am I saying that right?
What?
It says TOLER.
Tolerance.
Tolerance, though it might make some courage. I don't make a taller fence, but fight to build a better bridge. I talk not only of distances from where and how we came. I also walk differences to show we are the same. I'm a movement that roars and springs. There's a wave where my change sings. Change sings where there. Change sings where there inside me, because I'm a change I want to see. As it grows like seeds, I'm just what the world needs. We are the wave starting to spring, for we are the change we sing. We are what the world is becoming, and we know it won't be long. We all hear change strumming. Won't you sing along?
So we wanted to share that with you today, remind you that Jesus was a world changer, that you can be a world changer, and wanted you to hear that story. And I think Pastor Aurelia said in the comments, you can write or draw about how you can be a world changer, how you want to see the world change. And you can ask your grown-up if they'll share that with us in the chat later on. Bye, y'all. Say bye.
Bye.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, David and Riker. And friendly reminder to everyone, Riker has a birthday next week, so send him some love. Aurelia, can you post the liturgy up for me? Oh, awesome. Okay, I'm not going to read it yet, but I just want everybody to see it, because as you know, we've mentioned this a couple weeks in a row now, we have rewritten this liturgy for everyone. And I wanted to talk about my favorite line in it, but I wanted to invite you. Do you have a favorite line or a meaningful line in it? Post a comment. If so, let us know what that is and why that is. I want to first say we give ourselves permission. Like we didn't ask anybody, for this. We give ourselves permission to rewrite and to re-envision the symbols, the rituals, the stories of the Christian tradition. We give ourselves permission to do that. We give you permission to do that because we think all theology and liturgies and rituals, they are tools to lead us toward the way of Jesus. They are not proxies for God. They are not proxies for God's self that need to be revered and worshiped and protected and guarded and all that. No, they are tools in our hands that God's Spirit within us teaches us to use and tells us how to modify, whatever it may be, that to lead us on that divine path. And so we have that freedom around here to do that. And you can see we've done it. We've rewritten the Communion Liturgy. So be thinking about what are some of your favorite parts in there. I see some comments already. God is also within you. Thank you, Sarah, for sharing that. So my favorite line of all of these is we join in the beloved community. We join in the beloved community. The notion of the beloved community was Dr. Martin Luther King's, one of his favorite phrases. He didn't invent it. He got it from another philosopher, theologian, who probably got it from somewhere else down the line, but it became kind of the goal of Dr. King. And let me read a little excerpt from the King Center, which is this community, the center that was founded by Dr. King's widow in 1968, Mrs. Coretta Scott King. And it says on their website, the core value of the quest for Dr. King's beloved community was agape love. This is what it was all about for Dr. King, is creating this sense of agape love, this notion of love that Jesus and then the rest of the New Testament writers were absolutely obsessed by. And Dr. King distinguished between three different kinds of love: eros, a sort of romantic love; philia, this affection between friends; and agape love, which Dr. King described as understanding and redeeming goodwill for all. All. An overflowing love which is purely spontaneous, unmotivated, groundless, and creative. Isn't that beautiful? Dr. King said it was an overflowing love which is purely spontaneous, unmotivated, groundless, and creative. The love of God operating in the human heart, he said. He also said agape love does not begin by discriminating between worthy and unworthy people. It begins by loving others for their sakes, and it makes no distinction between friend and enemy. That is beautiful. It is directed toward both, he said. Agape is love seeking to preserve and create community. And in his 1963 sermon, Loving Your Enemies, published in his book, Strength to Love, which I haven't read that book. I didn't know that book existed. I would love to read it. Dr. King addressed the role of unconditional love in struggling for the beloved community. And he wrote, with every ounce of our energy, we must continue to rid this nation of the incubus of segregation. But we shall not in the process relinquish our privilege and our obligation to love. Listen to this. He said, while abhorring segregation, we shall love the segregationist. While abhorring segregation, we love the segregationist. This is the only way to create beloved community, Dr. King wrote. So beautiful, so brave, so bold. This non-dualistic thinking that says we hate segregation, we love the segregationist. And that's how we're going to create beloved community in this world. Now, fast forward 50 years, what does that look like for us today as we talk about the beloved community and creating the beloved community? what does it look like for us here at Peace, right? Well, the first thing we say, our very base kind of posture and approach is we're going to have what's called an open table or open communion. Everybody, no matter what, is welcome to participate in communion. It's become so commonplace around here. It's just part of our ethos and part of what we do. You go to other churches, though, and it's very likely people will be excluded. They are not creating that sense of open, beloved community, but it's just part of what we strive to do, believing that here at this open table, we are planting the seeds of a different world. We are planting the seeds in hearts and minds and even bodies of a different world. And even our young ones, the youngest of us that get to participate, believing that we are already creating a different world. So I hope that this communion liturgy that we wrote means a lot to you. For years, we borrowed one from a different tradition. That's part of what we do here at Peace as well. We grab from different traditions and say it all belongs in this garden. And so we finally, as one of our goals for 2022, Fran O'Reilly and I worked for months on this and said, let's re-envision, let's rewrite this because we are free to do so. And so this is my favorite line. We join in the beloved community. So I invite you at this time, wherever you are, you can see the words on the screen here. I'll read the normal font and everybody will join in the bolded font as we recite together these words. God is within you.
God is also within you.
Lift up your hearts.
We join the beloved community.
Let us give thanks for the blessing of life.
Together we raise our voices
in gratitude.
I invite you to pray with me at this moment. Our God, help us to join you in the rewriting of the violent and dehumanizing liturgies that our world mindlessly recites. Help us to join you in replacing those liturgies with liturgies that speak of beloved community. We can't do this without you. We need your spirit. We need your guidance. We need your spirit and life through one another as we do that work. Amen. Please, at this moment, take your elements. Amen. Great is the mystery of faith.
Christ
His
Christ
resurrection
defeated death,
and we
and
join
we
him
join
in
him
bringing
in
heaven
reigning
to
in
earth.
Amen.
Yeah. Okay, so as we are moving forward, working to bring our own selves into, sorry, I gotta change my sound settings, into alignment with the beloved community. We, of course, have as our pole star in the work this brilliant, shining, beautiful example of unconditional, groundless, and boundless love that is the Christ. And all of that love is the only reason we pay any attention to the Christ, right? Because it's so inspiring and beautiful. And so, speaking of liturgy and good liturgy, this hymn was written in 1875, and it's one of my all-time favorite hymns, all about the deep, boundless love of Jesus that draws us into the beloved community. Yeah? If you know it, you can sing it. Oh, the deep, deep love of Jesus, vast, unmeasured, boundless, free.
Okay, here we are. Hi. Hi, David. I think you might be muted.
I don't think so.
Oh, there we go. There we go. I can hear you now. Oh, that was such a beautiful song. Thank you, Fran, for singing that. Oh, so beautiful. I kind of want to just like go to sleep now. Like, I feel so held. I think I say that every time Fran sings, though. Basically, I need a lullaby album with her singing. Well, welcome, David. It's so great to see you, and thanks for being willing to preach virtually. I know that's kind of a tricky thing, especially when you're used to doing it in person. But it's so funny to me that your book just happened to come out. Like, it all happened to happen in the last week. It wasn't a plan, like David's going to preach and his book will be promoted. Like, it wasn't. It was just total coincidence. So
I really didn't know when it was going to come out. They gave me a number of months, and this was quicker than I thought.
yeah, and it's just the timing. So I'm excited to get to talk to you about that. But first, let me just say in the comments, the surprise bonus question today will be chosen from the comments. So please, please someone drop a comment in there and we will pick one for the bonus question. But first of all, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you, because I know we have several new faces since you last were on the screen doing this. So we changed the questions up for those who were on the screen listening last time you did this, though.
Okay. I was born in Texas, but a lot of my growing up years was in Southern California. I was there from about 3rd through 10th grade, and I lived in an area that was fairly close to Disneyland. Just before my junior year in high school, my father moved, and the family moved back to Houston, and I finished high school there. My dad works for NASA at that point, and I went to Baylor. I went to theological seminary in Kentucky. I came back to University of Texas in Austin and did my PhD there. And then teaching jobs. My first teaching job was in Kansas, where I taught at a Quaker school. And the second one was in Arizona. I taught at a Baptist school. And the third one was in Mississippi. I taught at University of Southern Mississippi, sometimes called Southern Miss. The most famous alums of Southern Miss are probably Brett Favre and Jimmy Buffett, believe it or not. I never met either of them. They were there before my time. But I taught in Mississippi for about 25 years. About 18 of those, I was chair of the Department of Philosophy and Religion. I retired in 2018, and Joyce and I moved to back to Texas to be closer to family.
Thanks for sharing. That is a lot of adventures throughout your life and a lot of experience in university world and academia. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Well, so you've written a couple of books that are more academic in nature, and I haven't started yet. I've actually been out of town and I haven't checked my mail, but I think that my copy should be in the mail by now. But you have a book that has just come out. And when I sent you this email, the question said, you have a book coming out this year, but it's already out. So we can actually, that link is in the comments, by the way. Can you share with us what the book's called, what it's about, what inspired you to write it?
Okay, I'll try to be brief. The book is partly autobiographical in the sense that I talk in the book about growing up in fundamentalist Christian churches and being told we teach what the Bible says, and the Bible is a message directly from God, and you can't change anything. It's all a package deal. And then I remember as I grew up having difficulty accepting some of the things that I was taught, but reading that intelligent Christians rejected the version of faith that I had been taught. And so I went through a kind of process of rethinking things that many of our people in our church have done. And the book describes in some ways that process, and it tends to serve as a guide for other people who want to rethink their faith, don't just want to accept what they have been taught. There are 4 parts of the book. The first part deals with faith. It talks about having a faith that's neither too rigid nor too flexible. It talks about the role of evidence in relation to faith and raises the question of whether or not you can have certainty. The second part of the book is about biblical interpretation. When I started writing, I didn't plan to write so much on biblical interpretation, but it turned out to be 5 chapters because I came to the conclusion that the way many people are taught to read the Bible is what messes them up. And so I try to suggest different ways to understand the Bible that maybe can lead to a deeper faith. The third section of the book deals with kind of rethinking of some Christian teachings. I have a chapter on the death of Jesus and how to understand it, a chapter on being saved, which was a big thing in the tradition that I was brought up in. There's a chapter on how much control God has over the world, one on divine punishment, and one on what I call signs and wonders. Some of those chapters take the form of what I was taught and then compare that to what I think now on these issues. And then the final chapter is about what I call substantive faith, and this part talks about what I think should be central to anybody's Christian faith. In particular, Jesus' teaching about the kingdom and the resurrection. I talk about what the resurrection meant to New Testament writers and whether you can believe such a thing.
Wow. That's a lot. We already have some people that are like, all right, I'm getting my Kindle out. Thank you so much for sharing.
I should say the Kindle edition is not available right now, but they told me a couple of weeks it'll be available. Right now it's just paperback, and then there's going to be a hardback.
Wow, that's awesome. So exciting. Cool. Okay, well, there's so many questions, but let me just ask you this one. What's your favorite book on your library back there?
My favorite book in my library? Gosh, I don't know. I have to look at them. But I'll tell you, one of my favorite authors is Charles Taylor, who probably nobody's heard of, and he's a Canadian philosopher, and he has inspired me in lots of ways.
What was his name again? Sorry.
Charles Taylor.
Charles Taylor.
And one of the first books I read by him was called Sources of the Self. But he later wrote a book called A Secular Age. And in the book, The Secular Age, he's thinking about the question of, if you go back about 500 years, not believing in God was inconceivable, and now it has turned into a kind of option. And he asked the question how that came about.
That is so interesting. Thanks for sharing. Okay, well, last question. What is giving you joy these days?
I think what gives me joy these days is what has always given me a kind of joy. And it's being puzzled about something and then thinking that I have found the solution to my puzzle. Probably I went into philosophy because I like being puzzled and I like the creative work of trying to figure things out. And the way I figure things out is mostly through writing. For me, writing is thinking. You think at a deeper level when you write than you do when you're just in a face-to-face kind of conversation and talking off the cuff. I was privileged to be in a job where part of my job was to think about things and to write about them. And I also had to do some things that I didn't like so much, like administrative work. So now that I've retired, I can do the things that I like and forget about the things that I didn't like.
That sounds awesome. I'm so glad that you, after many years of kind of having to do what you need to do or what you're supposed to do, you can just do what you want to do, and that you get to find joy in the writing. So thank you so much for sharing. We're going to move on, but we look forward to hearing your sermon in just a moment.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Eleanor. I'm going to be reading to you Luke 6:27-36. To you who are ready for the truth, I say this: love your enemies, Let them bring out the best in you, not the worst. When someone gives you a hard time, respond with the energies of prayer for that person. If someone slaps you in the face, stand there and take it. If someone grabs your shirt, gift wrap your best coat and make a present of it. If someone takes unfair advantage of you, use the occasion to practice the servant life. No more tit-for-tat stuff. Live generously. Here's a simple rule of thumb for behavior. Ask yourself what you want people to do for you, then grab the initiative and do it for them. If you only love the lovable, do you expect a pat on the back? Run-of-the-mill sinners do that. If you only help those who help you, do you expect a medal? Garden variety sinners do that. If you only give for what you hope to get out of, do you think that's charity? The stingiest of pawnbrokers does that. I tell you, love your enemies, help and give without expecting a return. You'll never, I promise, regret it. Live out this God-created identity the way our Father lives towards us, generously and graciously, even when we're at our worst. Our Father is kind. You be kind. We hear the voice of God through these words.
Thanks be to God.
I'm reading from 1 John chapter 4, verses 7 through 8. Beloved, let us love one another, because love is from God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, for God is love. We hear the voice of God through these words. Thanks be to God. This is one of those seasons where I'm experiencing a little congestion, so I hope you'll forgive me if I have to clear my throat occasionally during this message. But here goes. We're having a series of sermons on Epiphanies. The epiphany that I'd like to share with you this morning starts with something that I noticed in New Testament texts that I hadn't really paid attention to before. I suspect that most of you have had the similar kind of experience of reading something in the Bible, maybe even hundreds of times, and failing to notice things that in retrospect seems blindingly obvious. Often the reason that we miss obvious meanings in the Bible is that we've been programmed to read biblical text in ways that hide from us what we're not expecting. Like many of you, I was programmed to think that the question of whether you're a Christian is centrally about whether you affirm particular beliefs. Now, admittedly, there are belief tests in the New Testament. I don't want to suggest that you can be a Christian no matter what you believe. But as I was preparing the final chapter of my book last year, what jumped out at me was the realization that multiple scriptural texts propose a different kind of test of whether you're a Christian, a behavioral test. An example is the passage that we just heard from 1 John. If you're not reading this text with blinders on, it clearly says that whether we love other people is a sign of whether we've made genuine contact with God. If you don't love other people, the text tells us, you don't know God, since knowing God can't be separated from living in harmony with God's nature. Other New Testament texts give us a similar test of the memorable judgment scene in Matthew 25. The crucial question is whether you've shown compassion to the most vulnerable. Lots of people, including me, find ourselves a little uncomfortable with the idea of a behavioral test of whether you're a Christian. We worry that we may never measure up. I suspect that for many people, this discomfort is connected with the thought that God is threatening to do awful things to you if your behavior is not good enough. I think that that idea is a distortion of Christian teaching that we should probably do our best to get rid of. However, we shouldn't get rid of the thought that being a Christian is inextricably bound up with how you are living. That brings me to my epiphany. It is that the instructions Jesus gave us about how to live can be thought of as a program through which we learn to love others. So I would suggest that rather than getting too worked up about how close we are to achieving the goal, we might ask ourselves instead whether we're enrolled in the program. When I was teaching college, one of my courses was called Ethics and Good Living. In this course, we studied various thinkers who developed accounts of how to live a good life. In addition to readings from historical and contemporary philosophers, the anthology that I used for the course had a section in which various biblical texts were used to represent the teachings of Jesus. This section included selections from the Sermon on the Mount and from the parable of the Good Samaritan. I was teaching at a state university, so some of the people in my class had no background at all in the Bible, and others brought with them an understanding based on what they had heard in church. When we looked at the text from the Gospels where Jesus taught some things that seemed pretty demanding, such as turning the other cheek and loving your enemies, there was considerable discussion in the class about what these texts meant. Some students expressed the thought that these teachings would be extremely difficult to put into effect. Others thought that there were ways to limit what was taught so that it was less demanding than it might appear on the surface. However, most students agreed that Jesus was teaching a way of life that was strikingly different from how most people act, including most people who say that they're Christians, and that most people, including Christians, don't really attempt to live according to these instructions. I typically ask the class whether it was important for someone who claims to be a Christian to follow Jesus's teaching. Some said yes, but a significant number of Christian students thought that obeying the most difficult instructions was not really expected. They said that Jesus didn't actually intend people to live as he taught, but rather to realize how far short they fell from God's standards so that they could repent and be forgiven. In other words, they thought that the teachings were intended to reveal human sinfulness rather than to serve as instructions about how to live. I suggested to these classes that there was something a little odd about claiming to be a follower of Jesus, but not trying to live in the way that he taught. By this time in the course, we'd read numerous ethical teachers. Some of them advocated ways of living that were very demanding, requiring disciplined retraining of habitual ways of thinking and acting, which couldn't be accomplished without sustained commitment. Nobody had suggested when we read each of these teachers that they weren't really trying to get people to live as they taught. So I asked how plausible it was that Jesus didn't intend his followers to behave as he instructed them. After all, didn't he say that his teachings were like that obeying his teachings was like building a house on sturdy foundations? This brings me back to the idea that I started with, a test of whether you're a Christian that focuses on whether you are loving other people. What I want to suggest is that loving others is not typically something that we can do immediately just because we think we should, but it's something that we can learn to do by following a set of practices that prepare us to love. Think of the program of instruction that Jesus gives as like a school in which you are unlearning some habits and learning new ones. In this school, we're given a set of disciplines that we can consciously choose to follow. If we practice these disciplines, the result is to clear away some of the barriers that keep us from living a life of love. Ideally, the church should be a community that facilitates the process of learning to do what Jesus taught. In other words, to be his disciple. But for a variety of reasons, churches have often been very poor at teaching us how to live as he instructed. Sometimes churches haven't even realized that part of their job was to make disciples, not just to get converts. And too often they promoted agendas that lead to a kind of self-righteousness and disparagement of others that is at odds with genuinely loving other people. But that doesn't mean that we can't envision the kind of community that provides guidance, encouragement, and support for people who are trying to follow Jesus. Taken together, the teachings of Jesus can be understood as outlining a curriculum that can help us dismantle habits that keep us from loving. For example, one thing that blocks our ability to love others is that we are so good at finding fault in them. The human tendency is to notice and condemn the faults of others, but to be less aware, maybe even oblivious of our own failings. We don't typically think that our judgments of our own behavior are biased. However, we find it easy to come up with rationalizations to justify what we do, and we reflexively take a defensive stance when others question it. One social scientist, citing research studies that show people who do bad things typically think they are good people who are motivated by good reasons, suggests that we all have what he calls an inner lawyer, whose job it is to represent our actions in the most favorable way. Further, we actually believe the stories our inner lawyer invents for these purposes. In response to our built-in tendency to judge others more harshly than we judge ourselves, Jesus tells his followers not to judge, or perhaps not to judge unless they're willing to have the same kind of judgments applied in their own case. Using a memorable and picturesque image, he asked, "Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but do not notice the log in your own eye?" If we had a more realistic understanding of our own faults, we might not be so quick to call attention to the faults of others. But we are prone to take a point of view that hides our own failings while highlighting other people's failings. Of course, Jesus knew as well as anyone that never finding fault with another person is not really a realistic option. Some negative judgments are proper and even inevitable. Jesus himself makes negative judgments when he calls the religious leaders of his time hypocrites. And we can't really have a sense of justice without being able to recognize some instances of injustice. The problem for most of us, however, is that our fault finding gives expression to a presumption of superiority that gets in the way of more loving responses. When we set up ourselves to pronounce someone guilty, we don't usually do it out of a concern for the person's well-being. Often it's a way of putting the other person down a peg or claiming the moral high ground for ourselves. And the attitudes toward others that accompanies our pronouncements tend to crowd out more charitable thoughts about other people. So, following the way of love means that our tendency toward fault finding needs to be tempered. Instead of allowing it free rein, we need to cultivate the habit of restraining the urge to call attention to the faults of others. It's not hard to see that restraint of this sort is often wise. We can recognize that our judgments, the ones we're inclined to make, are often presumptuous and ill-considered. How often do we reach a judgment in anger without attending to the relevant facts, or in ignorance of considerations that would lead us to revise our judgments? How often are we rigid or unsympathetic in the way that we apply our standards? How often are we using our judgments to hurt the other person? What Jesus says about not seeing the log in our own eyes suggests a rule of thumb that we might use to restrain our tendency to make pronouncements about the faults of others. Suppose we consider their failings from the same kind of perspective we apply to our own behavior. If we would make excuses in our own case, shouldn't we be ready to consider the same kinds of excuses from others? More generally, if we would give ourselves the benefit of the doubt, shouldn't we be ready to do the same for others? Most of us are skilled at finding ways to avoid admitting fault in our own case. So perhaps we should apply these skills to considering how the faults we are so eager to point out may be less clear-cut than they might initially seem. Or we might think that even if someone has done something wrong, if we knew all the facts, they might seem less blameworthy than we assume. With some effort, we may be able to apply to assessments of others the same kind of charitable interpretations that come so easily when we consider our own acts. But what if the fault is genuine? What if we've exercised restraint, but the judgment of wrongdoing is inevitable? Can we then make a judgment? Often we can, but there's another teaching of Jesus that may apply in such a situation. We should be ready to forgive. Forgiving actually presupposes that we have made a judgment that someone has done wrong. Otherwise, there's no need to forgive. But Jesus' teaching about forgiveness tells us what to do when we make such a judgment. His teaching is difficult to put into practice, and it goes against strong inclinations. It often violates our common sense, and sometimes it seems absolutely crazy or at least utterly misguided. But the instruction is not unclear. Jesus teaches that when others wrong us, we should forgive them. I understand the forgiveness he calls for to mean refusing to hold the wrong against the other person and relinquishing our desires to hurt that person. But why? We all have a strong sense that people should be held accountable for what they do. And forgiving sometimes feels like not standing up for yourself or standing up for somebody that you care about. However, don't confuse forgiveness with papering over a misdeed and pretending that there is no real wrong done. And remember that a willingness to forgive does not exclude efforts to protect yourself or others from continued victimization. In the most admirable cases of forgiveness, the refusal to respond with hostility is not a matter of lacking self-respect. Instead, it proceeds from an unwillingness to enter into the cycles of ill will that so often poison human relationships. At best, forgiveness is a display of love that is shown by a willingness to give others more than they deserve. And often, it is a recognition that bad behavior is bound up with the kind of ignorance and confusion that pervades the human condition. People in our day sometimes suggest that forgiving others should be done for our own peace of mind, that an unforgiving spirit leads to internal bitterness that in the end hurts us. That suggestion is not without merit, but it's not really the focus of Jesus' teaching. Christian forgiveness is rooted in the thought that even those who have done terrible things have a potential for reformation that can be triggered by an experience of grace. By holding firmly to a vision of what the other person can be, we can lay down our obsession with extracting retribution and replace it with a concern for redemption of one who has strayed from the path. A fuller awareness of our own failings can help us to see the need to extend grace to others. Jesus portrays forgiveness as flowing from a realization that God has forgiven us. In his model prayer, we ask for forgiveness as we affirm that we also have forgiven those who have wronged us. Nothing I've said is intended to suggest that following Jesus' teaching about forgiveness is easy, or that it may not be painful to put into practice. In a way, that's just the point. Being willing to forgive is being willing to absorb pain ourselves rather than inflicting it on others. In cases of major wrongs, forgiving may not be something that we can do immediately, but trying to obey Jesus means striving to get to the point where we are able to forgive. What we are seeking is to respond to others with love instead of hostility. The difficulty of forgiving is closely connected with the difficulty of laying down our anger. Anger is often an automatic response when we perceive that someone has wronged us. It's a response that's built into the programming of our bodily systems. We can recognize that anger plays a useful role in human relations. It functions as a signal to others of the need to back off. It motivates people to protect themselves or to protect others from someone who has violated the rules of proper behavior. However, anger also has a downside. Jesus focuses on the connection between anger and violence. He traces acts of murder to getting into the kind of angry state conducive to thoughts and intentions to harm or kill another person. He's obviously not saying that anger always has this result, but he is saying that being filled with rage towards someone puts us on dangerous ground. Not only can things escalate beyond control, the response of anger tends to fuel our tendency towards self-righteousness and to hide from us less hostile ways of responding to others. When we are angry, we're making a kind of judgment of others that Jesus warns us about. Anger is not just a feeling, but expresses a construal that someone has done wrong. Our bodily states reinforce our construal and predispose us to defend ourselves against the wrongdoer in verbal and nonverbal ways. The judgments that we make in angry states are typically not nuanced ones that take into account all the relevant considerations. They may sometimes be correct, but they are often overly simplified ways of thinking about what has happened. So if we take Jesus to be warning us about fault finding generally, we might understand his teaching about anger as warning us that we need to learn to question our angry responses and to restrain them. An important strategy of restraint is to refrain from some behaviors that an angry state might lead to. Jesus' teaching not to retaliate for wrongs done exemplifies this kind of restraint. Following a policy of not retaliating is a way of guarding against the danger of anger escalating beyond control. But there's a broader reason for the practice of non-retaliation. Retaliation against others conflicts with forgiving them. If you think that forgiveness is the proper Christian response, you should recognize that reserving the right to retaliate for wrongs done is antithetical to the Christian way of life. Paul echoes the teaching of Jesus when he says in Romans that vengeance should be left to God. He also says, in harmony with Jesus' teaching, that the Christian response to those who wrong us is to do good to them. Instruction to do good to those who harm us goes against strong intuitions that are both biologically and culturally based. Our intuitions are structured by what has been called the principle of reciprocity. Do good to those who do you good, but respond to people who treat you badly by giving them the same kind of treatment in return. Sometimes this standard is called the copper rule. The rule describes, I think, how people generally behave, but it contrasts significantly with the golden rule that Jesus endorses. Treating others as you want to be treated calls for doing good even to those who are treating you badly. When people live in this way, their behavior can be surprising, even startling to people who have been socialized to think and act in terms of the principle of reciprocity. Non-retaliation and forgiveness can seem utterly naive. They can seem like ways of losing at the game of life and allowing others to take advantage of us. But Jesus seems to question our competitive orientation. He would not be persuaded by the claim that pursuing personal advantage is just what people do. Instead of thinking about how human life is generally lived, he focuses on what God intends it to be. He conceives of the life God intends not as an unrelenting struggle for wealth or power or status, but as participation in a community in which people care for each other, especially for those who are most vulnerable. In the kingdom community, people are willing to give up personal advantage when doing so is needed for the good of others. The commitment to follow Jesus is a commitment to live this way. I've mentioned only a few of the teachings of Jesus about how to live, but I think I've said enough to suggest that what he teaches can be understood as a set of practices that can help us learn the way of love. These practices are best learned in community. As Norman Wiersbe puts it, to learn to love, you have to practice with other people who are committed to inspire you when you are tired, celebrate when you succeed, and comfort you when you fail. At the beginning of this message, I called attention to the way the New Testament makes loving other people a test of whether you've made genuine contact with God. Thinking about things in this way can be discouraging. We're bound to see how far short we fall of the ideal. But I want to suggest that we think about it in a different way. Jesus invites us to attend a school in which over time intentionally engaging in certain practices can draw us closer to the way of love. The question is not so much whether we're ready to graduate, but whether we're committed to a process that can, in the long haul, enable us eventually to achieve a more human way of living. For most of us, I suspect that process will need to extend beyond this life, but that's okay because God has as much time as it takes. I want to conclude with a story that I think illustrates something about the kind of community in which Jesus might have envisioned us learning the way of love. It's a true story, but also a terrible one. In 2006, a man named Charles Roberts took an arsenal of guns into an Amish schoolhouse in rural Pennsylvania. He sent the teachers and the boys away, but kept 10 girls between the ages of 6 and 13 in the building. He then proceeded to shoot each of the girls in the head before turning a gun on himself. 5 of the girls died immediately, and 5 were left in critical condition. Roberts left behind a stunned wife, Amy, along with their 3 children. Within hours of the incident, members of the Amish community arrived at the Roberts house, bringing with them gifts of food and offering comfort to the family. They promised continued support for the family and later for the parents of Charles Roberts. A few days later, at the burial of the one who had brought such grief to the community, nearly 40 Amish people were present. The Amish showed no hint of hostility and no interest in retaliation. As a community, they were shaped by a tradition of nonviolence, and they had internalized the teaching to respond to evil with goodness. It wasn't a matter of discussion. They considered no other option. This schoolhouse shooting is one of what have become all too frequent acts of senseless violence. The tragedy of the event was not erased by what happened in the aftermath. The parents and the whole community still had to live with the loss of their precious little girls. But the slaughter of the children wasn't the whole story. What stands out is a response to evil that is strikingly different from the standard responses of anger and retaliation. What stands out is a community who lived in accordance with the teachings of one who had told them to love their enemies. The tragedy is undeniable, but so also are glimmers of a way of life that exhibits God's intention for human beings. We see people who are committed to practices that have shaped them to follow the path of love. May we also be that kind of community. May we be, as our name suggests, channels of the peace of Christ. Amen.
Okay, I'm Kristen. I'm going to lead you in the Litany for Conduits of Love. And I'm a little tearful after that sermon, so here we go. God, we are working on knowing that you're within us.
We're getting better.
Working power that you share with us. Your power and energy are unlimited, but our humanity is a finite container. So instead of being containers, we're learning to be like pipes, conduits of love. We know not everyone will accept us
or hear our message.
We know that often it's the people closest to us
who
will disregard us. So help us to know when to cut bait, shake dust, and when to keep pushing, seeking truth. And help us to do it all with gentleness and compassion, and no attachment to outcomes. We trust the power of God in us and in the world. The Spirit of God will go where it wills and where it's most needed. We can surrender. Just be part of the fun. The joyful mix of healing and awakening. The diverse experiences of this life. Though we tend to forget this, our power is not in judgment. Our superpowers are an endless supply of love and the ability to heed the voice of God within us. We'll let you handle the judgment. And we'll get on with the work of love. May love and peace flow freely and abundantly through us. May water dry ground, heal thirsty bodies, create abundance where once there was scarcity. Imagine just systems where injustice once prevailed, and build the commonwealth of heaven on earth. Amen. This is so good.
Yes, amen, Kristen. Thanks for reading that. Such a good litany written by Fran. And also just want to say thank you so much to David Holley for his incredibly thought-provoking sermon that sort of penetrates into your heart and soul and leaves you with so much to think about and so many new ways to think about love and the practice of it. Thank you so much, David. I will be thinking of that. It'll be up on the podcast in just a few hours. If you're like me, you might have to pause it a lot to make notes. I wanted to read and underline and highlight. It was just so good. Thank you so much again for sharing with us. I'm going to close this out with a benediction. This is a prayer taken from one of my favorite little books ever called The 7 Sacred Pauses. You should just expect me to be reading from it at any given point because it's so helpful. Just goes with me all the time. And the prayer is for the mid-morning hour where we are. I want to send us off and remind us that though we are not necessarily gathered in this space, we're still moving and flowing throughout our day, God in us. And so I hope this prayer reminds you of that and helps you to stay centered in all the various moments of your day that you have ahead of you still. O keeper of the hours, sacred is the pause that draws us into stillness. Nourishing are the moments when we step away from busyness. Teach us the wisdom of pausing. Reveal to us the goodness of stopping to breathe. Bring to our memory the truth that we are the temple out of which you pour your gifts into the world. We are the temple from which you sing your songs. We are the temple out of which you bless. Enable us to listen to the renewal you are trying to bring about in us and through us. May we be reverent with each temple we meet and greet this day. May all the good that we long for come to pass. Amen. Thanks, y'all, and have a great day.